It's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Wayne Visser. Wayne is a globally recognized Pracademic. He's a top 100 influencer on CSR and sustainable business, having written over 40 books and spoken in more than 70 countries on this topic. So to talk to us about trust, sustainability and thriving, please welcome Dr. Wayne Visser.
Well, good morning, everyone. Great pleasure and a privilege to be with you this morning. Today, I want to challenge us all to go beyond where we are today in the interests of our existential survival and beyond survival to thrive. Let's start with the central question of your conference. It's about trust. Here's some research from Cranfield University that shows that current leaders think that business already has a clear social purpose. 9 out of 10 of them. Future leaders, the younger people, and I see some in the room, that's great, actually only 20% believe that business currently has a clear and a compelling social purpose. There's a generation gap here. 56% of people believe today that capitalism is doing more harm than good. And of course, that's the basis for business. What's interesting is that business is seen as highly competent, but unethical. NGOs, by the way, seen as highly ethical, but incompetent. So there's nobody in the sweet spot. And of course, this is the role of standards, right? Is to both show the competence and the ethics, that it is possible. If we ask sustainability experts around the world, who is making the most progress in contributing to sustainable development, you can see the private sector is not doing too well, right? So here's where we're putting our trust in NGOs that are really active in this. On the other hand, when we ask those same experts who should be leading on sustainability, you can see that business is right near the top of the list. Again, an expectations gap here between what we are expecting of business and how business is perceived to be performing. And now we have, of course, all of the furore around ESG and ESG greenwashing and the backlash to ESG, right? Some of which, by the way, is funded by the oil and gas industry, some of this confusion, this backlash. So we have a really tough time. Now, let me give you 10 facts and figures, because we have to face up to the brutal reality that we are living through. Why is this trust crisis justified? Let's start with a small number. 5 is the number of years, the number of times in the last 5 years that extreme weather and climate have been the top risk according to the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report. 41 is the percentage of LGBTQ people who have left a job because of bullying, and half remain undisclosed for fear of discrimination. 69, a truly shocking figure. It took us 3.8 billion years to build up the life on this planet. It's taken us 50 years to wipe out 69% of wildlife populations. Just think about that. Insect populations in sharp decline as well. 151, the number of years it's going to take to close the gender pay gap on current trends. Still 40% globally. These are issues we think we're making lots of progress on. This is the reality check. Are we happy to wait 150 years? 320. We talk a lot about equality in the world. How do we reach equality in the world when inequality in our organizations is going up every year? 320 is the average CEO to worker pay. It used to be 20 to 1 in 1960. If you work for Amazon, it's over 6,000 to 1. Let's look at some bigger numbers. 79 million. The number of people forcibly displaced from their homes right now, many of which are internally displaced, and notice how it's doubled over the last 10 years or so. 636 million, this is a moving target, but this is, of course, the COVID cases in the world. Still more than 6 million people have died, and it increases daily. 280 billion, the cost of natural catastrophes every year. Storms, floods, droughts, wildfires. Not only killing people, but notice that less than half of these are insured. Millions of people whose lives are turned upside down and no help to get them back on their feet. 2.6 trillion. This is the cost of corruption in the world today. 5% of global GDP, $1 trillion in bribes paid every year. And 6 trillion, mentioned already in our introduction, that you're playing a role in this. This is the cost of cybercrime every year, and this has gone up 600% during COVID. So this is the world that we face, and why it's important is because we have to recognize where our global system is breaking down. But what people who study systems tell us is that when we get these shocks to the system, yes, the system can fall apart, or it can evolve and adapt and break through. And that's the choice we face today. Do we allow the systems to break down, or do we evolve rapidly to reach breakthrough? And notice that there's a decision window when it really, really matters, the decisions we're making, because that will determine whether we break down or break through. If we leave it too late, as in the case with climate change, we've got this critical decade. If we leave it too late, we enter what the system scientists call a chaos point, where nothing we do will have much impact on the outcome because there's too much momentum in the system. So this is our choice, break down or break through. And I frame it in terms of 6 great transitions that we have to make to thriving. Now, you've heard a lot about sustainability, so why thriving? This is something a little different. I've worked for more than 30 years now in sustainability, and my conclusion is that sustainability is still not clear. We have now 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not sure if that makes it clearer or less clear. But if I speak to different people as I do and I ask them what it is, still I get different answers. It gets adapted to however people want to understand it. Secondly, it's not working, and I hope some of those facts and figures have given you an idea of why I say that. Despite us doing more than ever before, more than we were doing 30 years ago, without a doubt, business far more active, and those trends are still extremely worrying. So something's not working. And finally, sustainability is boring, right? I hope we agree on that. It's not inspiring. Do you wake up in the morning and turn to your partner and say, let's have a sustainable relationship? Probably not. If you said, let's thrive in our relationship, I want our family to thrive, I want our company to thrive, our country to thrive, our city, I think we know that that is different from just sustaining, just surviving. And that's the crucial difference. So David Attenborough, in his wonderful documentary, A Life on Planet Earth, talks about how our civilizations are in danger of collapsing unless we change. But then the crucial sentence, in this world, a species can only thrive when everything else around it thrives too. We can solve the problems we now face by embracing this reality. So that's the challenge we set ourselves. And what we have to do is make these 6 great transitions. And we're in progress on these, and I'm going to give you some examples to bring them alive. There's the transition from degradation of ecosystems to restoration through what we call an eco-services economy, from depletion of resources to renewal through a circular economy, disparity or inequality to responsibility through an access economy, disease to revitalization through a well-being economy, disconnection, this is the technology piece, to rewiring through the digital economy, and something we've already talked about this morning, disruption, crises, to resilience through a risk economy. So let's bring these alive. And the way I want to do this is to give you the idea that there is tremendous innovation happening in all of these transitions right now. So what about degradation to restoration through an eco-services economy? Well, this is the new Google headquarters being built right now in London. And on top you have a 320-meter park. And the biodiversity in that green roof will be higher than the surrounding biodiversity in our countryside, which also tells you something about the state of our agriculture. This is something that the food companies are finally waking up to, under pressure, of course. A company like Danone, but I could also say Nestle and others, converting now to regenerative agriculture, to putting the life back in the soil, because according to the United Nations, we only have something like 50 harvests left before the soil is completely dead. Regenerative agriculture puts the life back into that soil. And there are many initiatives that business is getting involved in now, whether it's the 1 Trillion Trees initiative of the World Economic Forum, Business for Nature, the Natural Capitals Coalition, and so on. And I do hope, I'm sure somebody's going to tell me later, I do hope that you're working on or you have standards that are helping business to deal with the link to nature, the biodiversity crisis, because this is one where I feel like we're 20 years behind the climate crisis on making that link, making it relevant. How do you measure biodiversity impacts and make that relevant? What about the transition on resources that we need to make from depletion to renewal through a circular economy? Here's a case I love. I met this woman in Borneo in Malaysia, and she's an illiterate grandmother. She can't read or write, and she goes to barefoot college in India. And within 6 months, she's taught how to be a solar engineer. She goes back to her village of 100 households, installs a full solar lighting system for that village, which she will maintain for the rest of her life. This is the power of what we can do through innovation. This is Umicore. They have a lot of operations in Belgium. They used to be a mining company with operations all around the world. Today, they don't do any mining except for urban mining. Today, they're the biggest precious metals recycler in the world. They take back our phones, our laptops, our industrial waste, and they take out that precious metal. I don't know if you can figure out from the picture what's happening here, but here's a company, an architecture company from the Netherlands that takes our waste, in this case waste plastic bottles, turns it into 3D printing filament, and 3D prints all kinds of materials for the houses that they design and build. Circular economy. What about going from disparity to responsibility through an access economy? Well, of course, this is about diversity and inclusion. And here are some of the leaders at the moment in Europe, Hermes being one of the most prominent, and we can learn from that. Still a long way to go, by the way, and I just gave you a clue on the gender, but also on ethnicity, on all kinds of diversity, still a long way to go. Some inspiration from Hamdi Ulukaya, who's the CEO of Chobani. It's the largest Greek yogurt brand in the United States. He's a Turkish migrant, set up that business, and now does everything he can to employ migrants and refugees in his business. As a result, he's also a UN ambassador for that. Hello Tractor. This is Uber for tractors. If you happen to be in East Africa and you have a tractor and your neighbor farmer doesn't, you say, sign up to this app, and for a very small charge, you can use my tractor when I'm not using it. It includes that person in the economy, makes them more productive. So this is about economic opportunities. What about the transition to a well-being economy? Well, HP, I'm guessing there are a few HP laptops in the room, but they're also into medical tech. And so one of the things they do, they kit out a shipping container with everything you would need in a clinic. They ship it and they truck it to wherever it's needed in the world, in this case India, and then they get the local health worker to take people's blood, their heart rate, and they connect with doctors online from the United States to give professional diagnoses. Or take a look at this. This is a fetal heart rate monitor at the top. The difference is it's designed in Africa for Africa. It doesn't need electricity and it doesn't even need batteries. It's wind-up technology. Yeah, so we can come with what we call frugal innovation solutions. At the bottom, This is an ultrasound from General Electric. This used to be a gigantic machine that would cost tens of thousands of dollars that only the biggest, richest hospitals in the world could afford. Today, this costs about $150 and it's handheld, and health workers all around the world can use it. Of course, we have to talk about diet if we talk about health. Not only is a plant-based diet better for the planet, 80 to 90% less impact on land, on water, on carbon, but also for health. Not only has the World Health Organization said processed meat especially is carcinogenic, but Oxford University has done studies that show moving to a more plant-based diet, typically a Mediterranean-type diet, can reduce premature mortality, people dying too soon, by 20% globally. So let's take care of our diets. What about the technology piece? Well, when we think technology, we probably think laptops and smartphones and so on, but around the world, many farmers would still be using the old Nokia phones. Do you remember them? Anyone still in the room still use this? No. Okay. So many do, right? And you can take a picture, you can send a text, and you can call, and that's all that you need. So they gather them into a network, a little bit like a WhatsApp group. And if I'm a farmer in Argentina and I have a disease on my crop, I take a picture, I share it with my network. Someone from Vietnam says, "Oh, I saw that disease. This is how we treated it." Suddenly you've got a solution. Very simple technology, but very effective. We can go far more high-tech. So this is Provenance from the UK that uses blockchain technology to ensure sustainability of supply chains right from the start. This one to do with fish, of course, how it's sourced, how it's fished, how it's transported, how it gets to the customer. But they do it for gold, they do it for textiles, and so on. This is about credibility and trust. The problem with recycling, we know, is everybody puts everything in the wrong bins, right? Well, that's not going to be a problem anymore. Zen Robotics has a robot now that sorts with 98% accuracy mixed waste into the correct categories. So we can start to take out the human error on this. What about resilience? Well, this is a company, Planet Labs, that images the world in detail every day using 200 low-orbit satellites. Why is this important for resilience? Well, you can just about make out on that picture, you can do time lapses. So this is like Google Earth being updated every day. So imagine there's some illegal logging taking place. If I'm the government or the authority, I can pick that up within a few days or at most a few weeks, and I can get in there and I can stop that. Or take Ushahidi. So this is the earthquake actually in Haiti about 10 years ago, devastating, 200,000 people died. And this is a small tech startup from Africa, from Kenya. They created a platform very quickly where victims like this could send a text, say what they needed, it geolocated them exactly where they were, and then they had people crowdsource around the world who could speak Creole and translate these texts and get them to the aid agencies so that they could get the emergency supplies to where they were needed as quickly as they were needed. You might have seen in the news recently Patagonia changing their structure, putting their company effectively into a trust with the requirement that all of their profits, and remember this is more than $1 billion company, all of their profits in future have to be reinvested in tackling climate change. And I put it there because climate change is one of the biggest crises we face. For resilience, we have to be tackling it. Now, how do we know if we're moving in the right direction? One of the things I do in the book Thriving is distill it into scientific principles. And these are the principles of living systems that are designed to thrive. So let's go through them with some examples. The first is complexity. This doesn't mean complicatedness, it means networked relationships. This is a good thing. The more the relationships, the better. If you take the example of a termite mound, an ant colony, very complex social system, and they're doing all kinds of things. They're foraging for food, they're defending the nest, they're growing mushrooms underground, they're feeding the queen. The queen, by the way, is not the leader, she just lays eggs. They take out the trash and they bury their dead in a certain area. All of this they do without a leader. They self-organize, and this is the magic of complex living systems. And it's because of the complexity, because of the relationships that appear. Now, companies need to be thinking about this as well. This is a company that I do a lot of work with, the Port of Antwerp, Bruges, and they have a vision now to be the hub for green energy. And this includes especially hydrogen and ammonia, but also renewables around the world. So thinking in terms of those relationships, how can you increase the networks that you're part of? And then the second one is circularity. We know in nature and in society, everything goes in cycles. This is a documentary film that I worked on and presented. It's done very well, but if you're looking for inspiration, check it out on YouTube. And really it's about case studies in circular economy. And to give you an idea, this is from South Africa. It's the second largest remanufacturing plant in the world. They take Caterpillar equipment, those heavy earth-moving equipments, and before they fail, they take the parts back. They have all the sensors, so they know when it's ready. And they refurbish, they repair, they remanufacture those parts. It saves the customer between 20 and 60% compared to new, and of course it saves masses of energy, masses of steel and other materials. So circular economy, can you design your solutions in a way that are circular? Instead of the linear system that we have, take, make, waste. Currently the world is less than 10% circular, so we're throwing away 90% of stuff. And then we get the key of creativity. Well, we know in complex living systems, they are creative, they evolve, and they do that because of diversity. Now, this is quite a shocking chart, and for those at the back, I'll explain it. It's two questions. Would you like more gender equality in your country, and would you like more ethnic diversity? And it's absolutely shocking that not everyone wants more of both of those. But in fact, there are countries that don't want more gender equality. And even some of those leading countries that want more gender equality don't necessarily want more ethnic diversity. This is a huge mistake from a thriving perspective, because we know that the more we increase diversity and inclusion and equity, the better we perform. And there is some research to suggest this even links through to revenues in companies. And of course, young people want to work for an inclusive company today. So how can you always increase the diversity in the solutions, in the organizations that you're working in? And then we've got a key of coherence. Coherence is all about purpose. Another thing I was delighted to hear this morning already. Coherence. This is like murmuration of the starlings, right? Moving together. Even though there's no leader, we can have coherence. Now, maybe the Sustainable Development Goals do give us that kind of coherence, which is good. We're all moving in that direction. The interesting thing about it is research has been done to suggest in social systems, you only need between 5 and 25% of people moving in a common direction to shift the whole crowd. Yeah, so you don't have to be the majority. You can be an aligned minority, and that's very important. So as companies, you need this purpose as well as an organization. This is Ørsted, used to be an oil and gas company. Within 13 years, a Danish company became one of the world's leaders in offshore wind. And they did that because they changed their investment. They just ramped down their investment in fossil fuels, ramped up their investment in renewables. By the way, the oil and gas companies are out in force in COP27 this week, are still reinvesting 95% of their revenues into new oil and gas. So how can we find that purpose or amplify others' purpose? Then we get the key of convergence. This is how change really happens. This is a street in New York in 1900. It's all horse-drawn carriages, and where the red arrow is a single automobile. 13 years later, same street, all motor cars, one horse-drawn carriage. The entire transport system for a major city in the world flipped within 13 years because of convergence. And convergence is trends that reinforce one another. When that happens, change happens much faster than people expect. And there are many areas in society where this is happening right now. Here's the pattern for what's going to happen to oil and gas in the coming decades. It's more or less going to collapse. And you can see also the growth in renewables. And that's because the cost of renewables, wind, solar, and batteries, has been plummeting more than 90% in the last 10 years. So this is an economic argument, not just an ethical argument. As a result, you also see electric vehicles are going to come in much stronger, much faster than everybody thinks, because of various convergences that are happening between technology and social norms and policy pressure, and indeed market opportunities. Tesla now, one of $6 trillion companies. Their CEO is a bit distracted right now, but still, they are changing the world. So how can you add your voice to that? And the last one is continuity. We have to design for the long term. We have to get through the short-term crises, but in the end, it's about long-term thinking and planning and acting. Research by McKinsey shows that if you do that, the longer-term oriented companies perform better than the short-term oriented companies. They perform better on earnings, on revenues, on market capitalization, and on job creation. So how can you always be emphasizing that long-term perspective? Now, this is all very important for one reason, and that is that we really struggle with hope today. We see all of the headlines, we see those facts and figures like I showed you at the beginning, and we get despair, we get anxious, and what we need is hope and a thriving perspective. Tuning into all of the changes that are happening and the innovations allows us to hope, because thriving itself is life-affirming. Life is designed to thrive. We just have to get out of the way. We have to support that. Not only that, but it's more effective to have this perspective. If you're stuck in the problems, you can't actually be an effective change agent. So hope is actually a mindset, and it's based in action. And the other reason is that it's already happening. In my book, there are literally hundreds of examples I give of all of this change that is happening and accelerating around the world. But don't walk away thinking that hope is something passive. I love this quote from Rebecca Solnit. She wrote a book called Hope in the Dark, and she says, hope is not like a lottery ticket that you clutch sitting on the sofa feeling lucky. It is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency, and we're in an emergency. We're in an existential emergency right now. And she goes on to say, to hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable. And so I like to say that hope is a scarce but entirely renewable resource, and we need to invest in that. So let me end up then with some words of challenge and creativity. Because I think we need to be the people and the organizations, the institutions that create a place to thrive. Is the world a better place because we lived and loved and learned? What will our children have to face because of what we built and burned? Are people better than before because we gave them dignity? What happened to the sick and poor while we were living strong and free? Is the world a fairer place because we fought for equal rights? Who lost for us to win our race? Or did we open up new heights? Is nature thriving, great and small, because we walked upon the earth? Did oceans rise and species fall with every breath we took since birth? Is the world a dying place because our enterprises grew? Did we destroy our living space, or did we seed the world anew? Each day we get to use our voice to raise the tide or let it ebb. Each day we face a simple choice to nurture life or fray its web. Let's let the world be better still for every moment we're alive, because we choose to use our will to make our earth a place to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for giving us, I think for terrifying us and inspiring us in equal measure there. That's brilliant. And if I didn't already tell the speakers later on, we do expect you all to finish with a poem, so be prepared for that. There'll be a chance to ask Wayne some questions during the panel discussion, but I might just take the chance now to ask you a few questions. You took us on a journey from how bad things are, and you talked about that breakdown or breakthrough moment. Which of those spheres that you spoke about do you feel is closest to that crisis point, that breakdown? climate or social diversity?
Climate is breaking down, we know that, and we have this very crucial period now where we can ensure that we live in a less climate-damaged future. But for sure, we're in breakdown there. There is the planetary boundaries, which tell us this scientifically. But the ones that are ignored, I think, the silent killer is really biodiversity loss. And that's the one that I'm most frightened about, because that is the web of life, and we're completely dependent on that. And so far, business hasn't figured out how to make the connection. Now, again, there's good news here. We have an international meeting in Montreal later this year that's trying to come up with a Paris-type agreement, like we have for climate change, to have these big strategic goals for biodiversity as well. And basically, it's that we need to protect and restore 30% of our land and oceans by 2030. We protect and restore about 5% today, and 50% by 2050. So we know where we need to get to, and now we need to get active.
Yeah. I'm going to avoid the temptation to pretend that standards are a panacea for all these problems, but I know that we've got some work on biodiversity, so I might look for someone to talk on that shortly. Obviously, COP27 is coming to an end. Have you come away from that hopeful after the discussions, or do you think it's a missed opportunity?
I think what needed to happen at COP this year has happened, which is a discussion about loss and damage, right? This is about the fairness element. We sometimes call it a just transition on climate. It can't just be about the rich countries. It has to be about helping everyone to make that transition. And of course, the countries most affected are those that have contributed the least to the problem. So, rich countries have promised to give 100 billion a year to help. They haven't met that target yet. And then you look at Pakistan, 40% of the country is underwater, maybe more, and it's costing them 40 billion just this year, one event, one poor country. So that discussion has to happen, and it has been happening. On other areas, it's been, let's say, disappointing. The oil and gas lobby has been huge there. I think we can build, though, on Glasgow, which we had last year in December. Lots of exciting commitments being made there. Lots of new collaborations, finance getting into it, $130 trillion now backing up the change. So I think the momentum continues. Still a lot of work to do, though. We're off target, that we know.
Yeah. And to close, obviously, there's a lot of innovation there that you talked about. It's great to see some of the names of organisations that we work with, like Danone, like Caterpillar. What gives you hope?
Yeah, for me, it's I don't know if you can detect the accent, right? But I'm from South Africa, and I lived through that transition from apartheid to democracy, and that means I have a lived experience of how social transformation can happen. And I see all the same signs around us on the other transitions, right? You see the resistance from those in power. They are clinging to power. Violent resistance. We had that in South Africa as well, right up until the election week. We still had bombs going off in the street. And then that the change happens incredibly quickly. So this is about shifting norms. That's what gives me the most hope. And this is a role for standards, really. What you're doing is reinforcing that norms are changing. And as soon as people realize that the norms are changing, nobody wants to be left behind. It's funny, you can't find anyone who ever supported apartheid, right? Because the norms changed. And I think we see on many issues, we mentioned modern slavery, but on climate, many issues, it's simply that we're in a new world and it's being recognized and reinforced. And therefore, this transformation will happen much quicker than people think.